Okay, let's talk a little bit about if judges make laws or not. A lot of people misinterpret this and state this incorrectly. The obvious answer is no. Judges do not create laws. Only Congress can create laws. No, judges do not create laws. However, they do give meaning to things that are vague. And remember, we said a lot of what Congress does, a lot of the phrasing in a lot of the laws that they create are somewhat vague. So when they say like the terms like excessive noise or relative safety or within due time, those things, there's a lot of different ways to interpret those different phrases, and judges will give meaning to those vague kind of that vague terminology. They apply the law to real life situations. Not every scenario is exactly the same. And I think I gave the example of the school prayer thing the other day, a few months ago, where I talked about how schools can't get involved and push prayer on people, but there's varying degrees of this is the exact right answer. Where if I, as a school official, I'm like, you must pray, you must pray. That is the clear definition of no, you can't do that. You can't push it on somebody else. The clear, like in the school is in the clear, is if somebody voluntarily, just quietly amongst themselves does it, and nobody even knows, like that's clearly okay. And within that like range, there's obviously different variations of what's okay and what's not okay. And judges determine what that is. Most of the time, we expect judges to be impartial, fair referees. Basically, we don't really want them interjecting themselves too much in the case. We want the facts playing out, the lawyers, witnesses, that sort of thing, to really be the stars of the show. Judges are kind of there just to kind of do their thing. So, within our system, we look at a couple different things. Applying the law to real life situations means like we want to be very consistent. So what's legal today, we want to be legal tomorrow. So I'm going to start from the bottom and talk about common law a little bit. This is the idea of let's have the same outcome for similar cases. So let's just say I am riding my cart somewhere and I run over one of Sammy's chickens and I kill it, and she takes me to court and she says like, hey, you gotta replace that chicken. That's what the judge says. Like, I have to replace the chicken. That's my punishment. 2 days later, if somebody does the same thing, if Lainey's out and about, driving around her cart, she runs over one of Emily's chickens, kills it. Emily takes her to court. Again, common law says that in the same scenario presented itself the day before, I had to replace the chicken. So in this scenario, Emily would have to replace the chicken, Lainey would have to replace the chicken because she ran it over with her cart. That's common law. That creates, those precedents have to be followed. There's a pretty common, and this is a pretty big word that I would love you to know, that you should know, called stare decisis, which basically means let the ruling stand. It means the precedent has to kind of be followed. Now, there's a ton of cases out there. Sometimes those precedents conflict, and that's why we need courts to determine like which is the right one. What are we going to use going forward? We see all the time, and we've seen this, and we've kind of talked about this, how sometimes those precedents get overturned. Plessy versus Ferguson, for the longest time, was the precedent when we talked about segregation in schools. Well, that got challenged many, many, many times from 1896 when Plessy versus Ferguson was decided until Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. And every time they said, yes, yep, separate but equal is okay. And then in 1954, they made a change. So obviously the precedent in that case didn't stand. New information, new arguments, new way to look at the case. We decided that wasn't the way to go anymore. So precedents are the way that we want to decide cases until they're not, if that makes sense. So stare decisis is a big deal. Like, so we want to rule by precedent. like we mentioned, things are always popping up that are new. This is, I think, a really interesting case. It's not one that the AP people necessarily need you to know, but I just think it's a good one because this illustrates this point very clearly about applying real life scenarios to the laws to real life scenarios. The Civil Rights Act, 1964, basically says you cannot discriminate against somebody for race, for gender, for sexual orientation, for handicaps, for anything in a place of public accommodation. Casey Martin was a golfer that in the early 90s wanted to be on the PGA Tour. To be on the PGA Tour, you got to do a couple things. You got to qualify. You got to go through what they call the Q school, the qualifying school. You got to participate in some tournaments and score like at a certain level. Casey Martin did this, qualified to be on the professional tour. But when he got there, he was denied the right to use a golf cart because that's in the PGA rules. Now, when he was going through the Q school, he was allowed to use a golf cart. When he got to the PGA Tour, he was not allowed to use this. Most people say, what's the big deal? Well, Casey Martin had a congenital problem with his leg, I believe his right leg, that made walking extremely, extremely difficult for him. He was unable to kind of walk the 18 holes that he needed to do every day in order to play on the PGA Tour. Without the golf cart, he would not have been unable to participate. So he sued. He used the Civil Rights Act of 1964, said it discriminated against him on the basis of his handicap. PGA pretty aggressively defended, saying, hey, this isn't really public, it's not for everybody, it's part of our rules, it's an athletic contest, and part of it is the stamina of walking from hole to hole. Like Casey Martin kind of countered by saying, hey, for me walking to the cart to the tee or to my ball for the shot, that's a lot of work, it's a lot of effort. It's like people walking from the hole to the from the tee to the to the hole. So that little walk for him was a lot of effort and a lot of fatiguing. So again, a lot of people fall on both sides of this. They can see both angles, and it's the court's job to determine which is the right one. In the very end, they agreed with Casey Martin, and they said, yes, that would be discriminating to not allow him to use a golf cart, even though other golfers aren't allowed to, because it would discriminate against him because of his handicap. So again, that's what they do. So that's kind of a judge it's not making a law, because that's, again, not what judges do, but it's kind of setting policy. So judges don't make laws, but they can kind of set policies and change the way we do business in the world, as we saw with the Casey Martin case. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. I'm sure I'll talk to you guys soon. See ya.